I grew up in a household where hope seemed to hang in the air, promising a perfect future. My parents weren't the richest, but they poured every ounce of their love into me. As an only child, I reveled in the undivided attention. Then came the day my mother told me I was going to be a big brother. I was ecstatic, envisioning adventures with a younger sibling who'd look up to me as a guide, protector, and friend. I imagined us sneaking cookies from the jar, building forts, and sharing secrets under a blanket fort. Life, as I saw it, was about to become even better. When Jessica was born, the world around me shifted. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. My parents' eyes gleamed with pride as they showed her off to neighbors and friends. She was a beautiful baby, with her golden curls and sparkling eyes that seemed to light up every room. I adored her, too, at first. I would sit by her crib, talking to her in a way only a child could, promising her a lifetime of fun and friendship. I tried to be the big brother I had envisioned, eager to make her smile and share my little treasures with her. But as Jessica grew, I began to notice a change in the family dynamic. What was once my world became hers. It wasn't jealousy at first, just an odd realization that the spotlight had shifted. My birthdays, once the highlight of the year, now shared with her since our dates were only 2 weeks apart. I thought it was a fun twist, having a joint celebration. But by the second year, it became clear that the party was more about her than me. The pink decorations, her favorite cake, and the endless stream of gifts all screamed her name. My friends often asked where my presence was in the party. I didn't have an answer. The differences deepened as time went on. When Jessica started school, my parents' attention seemed to orbit solely around her. Her achievements, however small, were celebrated with a fanfare I didn't recall receiving. I'd win a class spelling bee, and it would be acknowledged with a quick, "good job." Jessica, on the other hand, would bring home a finger painting, and my parents would act as though she'd created a masterpiece worthy of hanging in a gallery. One moment etched itself painfully in my memory. It was a day I had eagerly anticipated, my 10th birthday. I had been begging for a bike for months, saving every penny from chores and small gifts from relatives. The morning came, and there it was in the living room, gleaming with promise. But before I could even touch it, Jessica came running, crying over a broken doll. My parents, distracted by her tears, barely noticed me standing there. The bike felt like an afterthought, a shadow of the excitement I had hoped for. The favoritism became a quiet undercurrent in my life. It wasn't blatant enough to confront but pervasive enough to feel. Jessica's needs always seemed more urgent, her feelings more important, her victories more celebrated. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that she was younger and needed more attention. But the sting of being overlooked became harder to ignore as the years went on. Even in small things, the imbalance was glaring. Family outings revolved around her preferences. If she wanted to go to the zoo instead of the museum, the decision was instant. If she disliked a meal, it was replaced with something she liked. My preferences faded into the background, an invisible sacrifice to keep the peace. As Jessica grew older, she blossomed into the golden child. Teachers adored her, friends flocked to her, and my parents beamed with pride at every step she took. I, on the other hand, became the quiet, dutiful son, excelling in school but never drawing much attention. It felt like I was living in the shadow of her glow, a second thought in my own home. Looking back, I wonder if my parents even realized what they were doing. Perhaps they believed they were treating us equally, or maybe they thought my silence meant I was okay. But the cracks in our relationship were forming, and deep down, I knew something was shifting in me. I loved Jessica, of course. But a seed of resentment had been planted, and it was quietly taking root. As the years passed, my life became a balancing act of quiet acceptance and a search for identity. I learned to shrink myself in Jessica's shadow, to avoid confrontation and disappointment. Every milestone in my childhood seemed to be overshadowed by her presence. College events, internships, and even friendships, her charm and natural ability always drew more attention, even if unintentionally. It wasn't jealousy, at least not initially. It was more a dull ache, a question that lingered: when would my moment come? I threw myself into hobbies, searching for something that would be uniquely mine. I discovered woodworking during my teenage years, and it felt like a revelation. My first project, a crude but sturdy birdhouse, was nothing special, but it ignited something in me. It was a space where I didn't need anyone's approval. As my skills grew, so did my confidence. I started making small items like picture frames and shelves, giving them to friends or keeping them tucked away in my room. The scent of freshly cut wood and the satisfaction of a perfectly sanded edge became my sanctuary, a place where Jessica's glow couldn't reach. During my early college years, I faced new challenges balancing studies and building my independence. Jessica, meanwhile, continued to thrive in her high school life, growing her social circle and excelling in her activities. My parents' praise for her achievements became a constant backdrop to our family life. Even as I tackled my college coursework and woodworking projects, the conversation always seemed to shift back to her. It was during this time that my woodworking evolved into more than a hobby. I started selling my pieces online, small items at first, custom signs, key holders, and picture frames. To my surprise, people seemed to love them. Orders trickled in, and soon I had a modest but steady stream of customers. Each sale felt like a small victory, a validation that I could succeed on my own terms. My parents' interest in my work was minimal at best, but that didn't matter. For the first time, I felt a sense of independence, a glimpse of what life could be if I carved out my own path. The idea of opening my own shop came to me during a late-night brainstorming session. I was sketching designs for a custom bookshelf when it hit me: I could turn this into something bigger. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but the idea of having something that was entirely mine, free from comparison or overshadowing, was too enticing to ignore. I started saving every penny I earned, cutting back on personal expenses and working extra hours at a local hardware store to supplement my income. Jessica, of course, remained at the center of my parents' universe. When she was accepted into a prestigious college, it was celebrated with a family dinner, complete with toasts and heartfelt speeches. By then, I had already been continuing my college journey, focusing on expanding my skills and growing my woodworking business. I'd been accepted into a well-regarded program, but my achievement was met with a simple nod of approval. I'd grown used to it by then, but the sting never fully faded. It only fueled my determination to succeed, to prove to myself that I was more than an afterthought. During my last year of college, an opportunity came that would change everything. A local artisan fair was accepting vendors, and I decided to apply. It was a long shot. Most of the participants were seasoned professionals, but I was determined. I spent weeks preparing, crafting pieces that showcased my best work. When the acceptance email arrived, I could hardly believe it. This was my chance to step out of the shadows, to show the world what I could do. The fair was a whirlwind. My booth, modest but inviting, attracted a steady stream of visitors. People marveled at the craftsmanship, asked questions about my process, and placed orders on the spot. By the end of the weekend, I'd sold nearly everything I'd brought and had a list of custom orders to fill. It was a turning point, a moment that solidified my decision to pursue this path. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, not defined by my proximity to Jessica's brilliance but by my own merits. It was exhilarating, but it also came with a new sense of responsibility. I knew this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to take it on, one step at a time. Announcing the opening of my own store felt like stepping onto a new battlefield. I knew the decision would be met with mixed reactions from my family, but their response still managed to catch me off guard. When I shared the news over dinner, my parents exchanged a quick glance before my mother suggested combining the celebration with Jessica's birthday party. The idea felt like a slap in the face. What should have been a moment to acknowledge my hard work was now being folded into yet another event centered around Jessica. I forced a smile, swallowing the rising frustration. The weeks leading up to the combined celebration were an exercise in patience. My parents' focus was predictably skewed. Every detail, from the guest list to the decorations, seemed tailored to Jessica's preferences. My own input was politely dismissed or outright ignored. I'd suggest a neutral theme to balance the focus between her birthday and my store's launch, only to be overruled by ideas that screamed Jessica's personality. It was clear that this wasn't about me at all. In the background, I poured every ounce of energy into preparing for the store's opening. Finalizing inventory, designing the layout, and crafting special pieces for the launch became my escape. The shop wasn't just a business venture, it was a declaration of independence, a way to step out from under Jessica's shadow. I reminded myself that the celebration, no matter how skewed, was just a stepping stone to something greater. The day of the event arrived, and the disparity was glaring. The decorations were an explosion of Jessica's favorite colors, and the guests, mostly her friends and our extended family, buzzed with excitement about her milestone. My announcement felt like an afterthought, sandwiched between a cake-cutting ceremony and a slideshow of Jessica's achievements. I stood on the sidelines, watching as my parents beamed with pride over every anecdote about her. As the evening wore on, I decided to take matters into my own hands. When the attention naturally began to wane, I stepped forward, holding a polished wooden plaque I'd created specifically for the occasion. Its intricate design and engraved details drew the room's attention. I cleared my throat and began to speak, carefully framing my words to highlight my gratitude for everyone's support while subtly steering the focus toward my store. The shift in the room was palpable. Guests who had been engrossed in conversations about Jessica's future turned their attention to me. I described the journey that had led to this moment, emphasizing the craftsmanship and dedication behind each piece in my shop. My parents' smiles were frozen, a mix of surprise and something that might have been guilt. Jessica, for once, seemed at a loss for words, her usual charm dimmed by the unexpected turn of events. By the time I finished, the room erupted in applause. People approached me with genuine interest, asking questions about the store and admiring the plaque. A few even placed orders on the spot. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. For the first time, I had managed to carve out a moment that was entirely mine, despite the circumstances. That night, as I packed up the remains of the celebration, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The event had been far from perfect, and the lingering favoritism was still a bitter pill to swallow. But I'd proven to myself that I could command attention, that my achievements were worth celebrating. The store wasn't just a business, it was a symbol of everything I'd fought for, and I was determined to make it a success, with or without my family's full support. The morning after the celebration, the house was thick with tension. The aftermath of my announcement lingered in the air like an unresolved storm. It wasn't long before my parents' frustration boiled over, their disappointment surfacing during breakfast. They didn't mince words, accusing me of hijacking Jessica's special day. My father's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard in years, questioning why I couldn't have waited for a separate occasion. My mother chimed in, her tone laced with dismay, as if I'd broken an unspoken family rule. Jessica joined in, her hurt palpable as she painted a picture of her birthday overshadowed by my so-called need for attention. Her words cut deeper than I expected, dredging up years of frustration I had long tried to suppress. I sat silently at first, letting their accusations rain down on me. But something inside me snapped. The years of being overlooked, of watching my achievements diminished next to Jessica's glow, surged forward, demanding to be heard. I finally spoke, my voice steady but firm, as I laid bare the resentment that had built up over the years. I recounted the countless moments when my milestones were overshadowed, the times when my efforts were dismissed or ignored entirely. I described the joint birthday celebrations that felt more like Jessica's events, the constant comparisons, and the way my successes were met with indifference. My parents' expressions shifted from anger to something resembling shock as I detailed the emotional toll it had taken on me. Jessica, however, wasn't ready to relinquish the spotlight. She interrupted, her tone defensive, accusing me of being ungrateful and dramatic. She tried to turn the narrative, portraying herself as the victim of my sudden need for validation. Her words were calculated, designed to draw sympathy from our parents. But I wasn't falling for it this time. The argument escalated, voices rising as years of unspoken grievances spilled out into the open. My parents tried to mediate, but their attempts only seemed to fan the flames. Jessica's tears came next, a tactic that had worked countless times before. She cried about how hard it was to be the golden child, the pressure of living up to everyone's expectations. It was a masterstroke, and I could see my parents softening, their focus shifting back to her. That was the final straw. I realized then that nothing I said or did would ever change the dynamics of our family. I had fought for years to carve out a place for myself, but in their eyes, Jessica would always come first. The weight of that realization hit me like a ton of bricks, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. I didn't need their validation to succeed. I had built something on my own, something that no amount of favoritism could take away. I stood up, my resolve solidifying with each step. I told them I was leaving, that I needed space to focus on my store and my future. My parents protested, their voices tinged with guilt and panic, but I had made up my mind. I packed my things over the next few days, moving into a small apartment I had been eyeing for months. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a space free from the shadows that had loomed over me for so long. The transition wasn't easy. The silence of living alone was both liberating and deafening. But it also gave me the room to breathe, to think, and to focus entirely on the final preparations for my store's grand opening. Each detail demanded attention, from arranging the display shelves to perfecting my most intricate pieces. My store became a symbol of my independence, a tangible representation of everything I had worked for. As the opening day approached, excitement and anxiety intertwined, but the thought of customers appreciating my craftsmanship filled me with determination. Jessica reached out a few days later, her message a mix of apology and justification. She admitted to feeling guilty about the way things had unfolded but stopped short of taking full responsibility. I didn't respond. For the first time, I felt no obligation to smooth things over, to make her feel better about the rift she had helped create. It was a strange kind of freedom, one I was just beginning to understand. Living on my own taught me more than I expected. It showed me that I was capable, that I didn't need to rely on anyone else to validate my worth. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like it was mine to navigate. And that was enough. A few days before the grand opening, I was putting the final touches on my shop when the sound of the door chime caught my attention. Turning around, I saw my parents stepping inside, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. They looked out of place among the carefully arranged displays, their presence a stark contrast to the peace I had cultivated in this space. My mother was the first to speak, her voice tinged with a false lightness that did little to mask her unease. They had come to offer help, but it didn't take long for their real intentions to surface. They wanted me to make Jessica a co-owner of my shop. The request hung in the air, an unwelcome intrusion into the sanctuary I had built. My father's rationale was simple: Jessica needed something to occupy her time, and working in my shop would be the perfect solution. I stared at them, their words echoing in the space between us. The suggestion felt like an even deeper intrusion, an attempt to tie my hard-earned success directly to Jessica, as if my achievements couldn't stand without her involvement. For a moment, I considered giving in, if only to avoid another conflict. But then I remembered the years of being overshadowed, the countless times I had sacrificed my own happiness to keep the peace. This was my line in the sand. I told them, calmly but firmly, that I would not make Jessica a co-owner of my shop. My decision wasn't up for debate. My mother's face fell, her attempt at a conciliatory smile faltering as she realized I wouldn't budge. My father's expression darkened, his frustration evident as he accused me of being selfish. The irony of his words was almost laughable. For years, I had been the one to compromise, to step aside so that Jessica could shine. This time, I was standing my ground. The argument escalated, their voices rising as they tried to sway me. My father spoke of family loyalty, my mother pleaded for unity, and both of them painted a picture of Jessica as someone in need of my help. But their words only strengthened my resolve. I explained, as calmly as I could, that this shop represented my independence, a space I had worked tirelessly to create. Handing over part ownership to Jessica would only reopen old wounds, undermining everything I had built. My parents' faces were a mixture of disbelief and hurt as they realized I wasn't going to back down. My mother's voice wavered as she tried one last time, her plea laced with guilt. But I remained firm. This was my shop, my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone else dictate how I ran it. As they left, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed in the quiet shop, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a pang of guilt, a lingering sense of loss, but also a profound sense of liberation. For the first time, I had drawn a boundary and held firm, refusing to let my family's dynamics dictate my decisions. The day of the grand opening arrived, and with it came a mix of exhilaration and nerves. The shop, which had once been an idea sketched on a notepad, was now a tangible reality. Every piece of furniture, every display, and every product on the shelves bore the marks of my dedication and craftsmanship. Without the presence of my parents or Jessica, the event felt like a clean slate, a moment entirely my own. As the first customers trickled in, their reactions were everything I had hoped for. Eyes lit up as they admired the intricate designs, hands reached out to feel the smooth finishes, and conversations buzzed with appreciation for the unique quality of the work. Some customers had followed my journey online, expressing excitement to finally see my pieces in person. Others were newcomers, drawn in by the shop's inviting atmosphere and the promise of handmade excellence. The support was overwhelming in the best way. Sales surpassed my expectations, but it wasn't just the numbers that mattered. It was the validation, proof that my work had value and that I could succeed on my own terms. The absence of my family's involvement no longer felt like a void but rather a choice that had allowed me to grow independently. As the day went on, I found moments to reflect on how much had changed. Living on my own, away from the constant shadow of Jessica, had been transformative. It wasn't just about the physical space but the mental freedom to make decisions without second-guessing myself. For the first time, I felt in control of my life, charting a course that was entirely mine. Toward the end of the evening, as the last customers filtered out, I locked the doors and stood in the quiet shop. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. This wasn't just a milestone, it was a turning point. I had proven to myself that I didn't need to rely on my family's support to achieve success. In fact, stepping away from their influence had been the best decision I could have made. In the days that followed, the shop continued to thrive. Word spread quickly, and I found myself busier than ever, juggling orders and planning for the future. Each new challenge felt like an opportunity, a chance to build on the foundation I had laid. The independence I had fought so hard to achieve was no longer just an ideal, it was my reality. Reflecting on the journey, I realized that family support, while valuable, isn't always a necessity. Sometimes, the greatest growth comes from standing alone, from finding strength in one's own abilities rather than relying on others. The experience had taught me that boundaries are essential, not just for protecting one's peace but for fostering true independence. To anyone reading this, wondering if they can make it on their own, you can. It's not easy, and there will be moments of doubt, but the freedom and confidence that come from forging your own path are worth every challenge. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your own experiences, and let's continue this conversation together.